Imagine you have two options. In the first, someone hands you $50 for free. In the second, someone gives you $100, then takes $50 back. You end up with exactly the same amount either way. But most people don't feel the same way about both options. The second one stings. Even though the result is identical, losing $50 feels significantly worse than gaining 50 feels good. That asymmetry isn't a quirk or an overreaction. It's one of the most powerful and least understood forces shaping your decisions, your relationships, your career, and the way you see yourself. It's called loss aversion. And once you understand how it actually works, you'll start seeing it everywhere, including in choices you were absolutely convinced were completely rational. The research began in the 1970s when psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky started noticing something strange about how people make decisions under uncertainty. When they presented participants with different kinds of bets and trade-offs, the responses didn't follow logic. People would take risks to avoid losing something they would never take just to gain the same thing. The pain of losing wasn't just unpleasant, it was disproportionate. Their research eventually showed that losses feel roughly twice as powerful as equivalent gains. Losing $20 doesn't feel like the opposite of gaining $20. It feels closer to losing 40. Kahneman and Tversky built an entire framework around this discovery called prospect theory. The core insight was that people don't evaluate outcomes based on absolute values. They evaluate them based on changes from a reference point, and those changes are not weighted equally. Gains feel good. Losses feel significantly worse. The mind is not a scale. It's a system that is heavily tilted toward protecting what you already have, even when holding on costs you more than letting go would. This makes evolutionary sense. For most of human history, losing meant something catastrophic. Losing food meant starvation. Losing shelter meant exposure. Losing social standing could often mean exile from the group entirely. The brain didn't evolve to maximize gain. It evolved to minimize catastrophic loss. The same instinct that kept your ancestors alive is now quietly influencing whether you quit your job, in a relationship, try a new approach, or start something you've been putting off for years. Consider how loss aversion shows up in everyday life. You keep a streaming subscription you barely use because canceling it would mean losing access to something you might want someday. You stay in a job that doesn't fulfill you because leaving would mean giving up your salary, your security, your status, even though staying is also costing you something, just in a form that's harder to see and measure. You hold on to a friendship long past the point where it's healthy because ending it would feel like a loss, even if continuing it is quietly one too. The invisible part of loss aversion is what economists call opportunity cost. Every choice you make is also a choice not to make something else. When you stay in the comfortable but limiting situation, you're not just avoiding a loss. You're also losing the possibilities that come from leaving. But because that loss is abstract, hypothetical, a life not yet lived, it barely registers compared to the concrete, tangible thing you'd be giving up by changing. The losses you can see and touch always feel more real than the losses happening invisibly in the background. This asymmetry affects your memory and self-perception too. Research consistently shows that people remember negative experiences more vividly and for longer than positive ones of equivalent intensity. A harsh comment stays with you far longer than a compliment of the same magnitude. A failed attempt feels larger in the mind than a comparable success. This isn't pessimism. It's the same underlying system. The brain flags losses as higher priority information because, historically, negative events required faster and more decisive responses than positive ones did. The problem in the modern world is that this system is running on hardware calibrated for physical survival in an environment that no longer exists. You're not trying to survive winter with limited food, but your brain responds to the possibility of a financial loss, a social rejection, or a failed creative project with something close to the same urgency. The stakes have changed considerably. The response system hasn't caught up. Loss aversion also quietly distorts how you evaluate the future. When you're weighing a decision with uncertain outcomes, You're not imagining success and failure with equal clarity. You're imagining failure more vividly, more concretely, and more emotionally. The downside scenario feels more real than the upside scenario. It has sharper edges in your mind. This makes risks feel larger than they actually are, and it makes potential gains feel more distant and abstract than they are in reality. You end up systematically underinvesting in possibilities because the risk of loss looms so much larger than the promise of gain. What makes this particularly important is that loss aversion doesn't just affect major decisions. It operates constantly in small choices you barely notice. You avoid giving an honest opinion because you might lose someone's approval. You don't raise your hand in a meeting because you might look foolish. You don't start the creative project because you might find out you're not as capable as you hoped. In all of these cases, the potential loss is doing far more work in your decision than the potential gain. And because the losses feel so immediate and the gains feel so uncertain, the default response is to stay still and wait. The antidote isn't to stop caring about loss. It's to become aware of when the system is overcalibrated. To recognize that when something feels like an enormous risk, your brain may be doubling the perceived size of the potential loss and having the perceived size of the potential gain at the same time. To ask not just what you could lose by changing, but what you are already losing by not changing. To make the invisible cost of staying visible. Kahneman described the result of this recalibration as the willingness to experience loss in the service of something larger. It doesn't mean becoming reckless or indifferent to consequences. It means understanding that the fear of loss is not an accurate signal about the actual size of the danger. It's an amplified signal from a system that evolved to protect you in a world that no longer requires that level of protection at that intensity. The $50 taken away will always sting more than the $50 freely given. That response isn't going to change. But knowing that your brain is actively tilting the scale doesn't mean you have to let it be the one who decides.